Real pleasure to be here at HUSTEF. I've been looking forward for so long to being at this conference. My name's Andy Brown. I work for a company called Expleo, and I'm going to be talking about something called red teams and how they can help organisations avoid making disastrous decisions, but also what actually our involvement as testers might be in those teams, because you might find it quite interesting. But before that, I'll go through this. Imagine that you're in a foreign situation. You're in some organisation and they decide, all the big wigs get together and they decide to put everything together and they embark upon a disastrous project. And many of us have been there. But what's also you may have had is that it's been obvious to the start. For quite a few people have said, oh, this is never going to work. Yep. But the question would be, why has nobody sort of said anything, or why has it never been brought up there? And in order to do this, you perhaps have to look at several different people within the organisations there. So one would be the CEO and the decisions makers, those that made it. Another would be the management team, that they didn't make the decision, but they were probably consulted or requested information from there. And then there's the workers as well. And if you look at those three teams there, and the first is for the CEO and the management team. Probably one of the problems is you can't see faults in your own plan. It's just a blind spot that we have there. But it can also be that they will not see those faults there. They can't afford to see their faults and show weakness there. And we know this ourselves already, because we know that in software development, we don't expect software developers to find their own bugs. You know, it's taken us several decades to work that out, and then it's taken us another couple of decades to work out different types of processes to avoid it there, such as pair programming and code reviews, and eventually, also having testers there. But we've worked it out. No sensible organisation would expect developers to find their own bugs and not have some kind of testing process in there independent of the person that wrote it there. Even with all of us in there looking for these bugs, it's still difficult. And it's even more difficult for those that are doing strategy for a couple of reasons. And the first reason there is that there's a power hierarchy going on here. So very often, if you're at the top, it's difficult to listen to those that are underneath there. But there's a second equally important reason, which is that in coding, very often there's a right and there's a wrong. Okay? But that's not so true if you're in strategy. Very often there's grey areas, and it's the first time it's being done. So there's not necessarily a clear right and wrong. So if we look at those others in that structure there, so perhaps the management there could be several reasons. One reason could be that there's no route to raise up their concerns there. If you're a manager, you may have been asked for information, but you may not have been asked to give an opinion on things. A second may be that actually you've got some vested interests. Sure, you know it's a really dumb project, but you're going to get some new tools and you're going to get to work on an exciting project. So maybe you've got some vested interest in saying nothing. A third could be that actually perhaps you don't see the whole picture there, and you need to see a whole joined up picture to actually recognise the problems that are going to come out. Or fourth, and this is probably common for us as well, you just dare not raise up those there. If you raise them up, maybe you're going to get called, well, he's not a team player, or he hasn't got she hasn't got a can-do attitude. So there's various reasons there. So perhaps what we want to look at is, we've only had corporates and organisations for perhaps a couple of 100 years at most. If we ask, well, what have we done in the past? So if you went back perhaps to sort of medieval or feudal times, you'd have had a different structure here. You'd have had a king instead of a CEO. Instead of that, managers, you'd have had courtiers. And then this is the rest of us here, the peasants. Okay, and how did it work here? Because typically the king never saw the peasants and couldn't talk to them, and sometimes he would actually be speaking a different language. And the courtiers would typically be very sycophantic, and so they wouldn't actually want to give the bad news there. Well, one of the things they had was a court jester. Now, the primary purpose of the court jester was to provide entertainment, primarily for the king. But they did, under certain circumstances, have a second role there, which was actually to speak truth to power. And they were allowed to do that in some courts under certain circumstances, which primarily meant that if they spoke it, they had to be amusing and not to make fun of the king. They could make fun of other people, not the king there. And so you can see, perhaps in our modern setting there, perhaps a red team can sort of provide that role there, a similar role to the court jester. Okay, but we don't have to do it and make it amusing. That's not a requirement there. So the question is, what exactly is a red team? Now, there's several sorts of red teams, but the one I really am talking about here is essentially the first one there, decision support red team. So you're supporting important decisions that are being made. There's also, just to avoid confusion, if you're doing simulations, the opposing force is normally called a red team, or in cybersecurity, those that are attempting to penetrate can be called red teams. But the ones we're interested in is decision support red teams there. And what they should be doing is as follows. This is the role there. So to challenge the organisation's orthodox thinking there, that what they think around a subject there, it's perhaps to question the current beliefs that the individuals within that organisation hold, either publicly or privately. It's to uncover those assumptions that are hidden there and test them out. And it's to develop a different and alternate perspectives to the one that is currently the current paradigm within the organisation. And the purpose for this is not to make decisions, but it's to provide that contrarian viewpoint so that the decision makers there can actually make a better informed decision there. Okay, it's not about usurping power. Now, the question is, why do we need these red teams? And we've gone through a little bit of this already. Essentially, we can't mark our own homework, and we know that, yeah? But we're deluded, and we actually think that we can. We can see that others can't mark their own homework, but I can mark my own homework there. Another is that we fail, and we fail in predictable ways, and we'll talk about those now. So essentially what we do is we will take shortcuts, and we'll take shortcuts for good reasons, because we can't actually get to the answer in the time and the resources that we've got. So we make a lot of shortcuts. We assume that we know more than we do. And again, there's good reasons for that. And that's because of the way that we actually develop sort of an understanding of a situation. Is that basically we'll look back to a past situation and then we will compare that and we will sort of say, well, it's similar, but there's a few differences. We overestimate how similar it is. A third one there is that we discount potential threats, and that's because of some biases like overconfidence effect, optimism bias there. Now, altogether, most of these benefits, these shortcuts, they will get us close enough to the answer, and they will get us there so fast, so much faster than this other route, which is actually quite slow, that actually it's good enough. It's just that sometimes it's going to catch us out. And when it does catch us out, if it's in strategy, it can catch us out in a big way. So, as well as not being able to mark our own homework and failing in predictable ways, we also have organisational pathologies as well. And perhaps the most best known one of these is group think there, where you'll get a senior team together, they become isolated, they all have the same views, and then they would do crazy things like invade the Bay of Pigs or so, and whole things like that. Now, group think is basically, it's caused by, you've got a desire for harmony in a group, but it leads to dysfunctional decision making. Now, harmony is not necessarily a bad thing. I worked at HMV and all of our groups were dysfunctional and they all hated each other, and it was a really bad time. So I can certainly say harmonious groups are generally better than disharmonious ones. The problem comes in how you achieve the harmony, and they do it not by actually exploring the dissent and coming to an agreement there, but it's by actively suppressing the dissent there. And this is the dangerous thing there. So what you need is a maverick. And so we should have good old Tom Cruise come along, and he's going to save the day for us. So he'll go shooting, whoops. He's going to go shooting off. He would have come down, crashing down there. And the reason is that actually, although we need mavericks, we have a problem with mavericks. Being that organisational maverick, it's going to be hard. And actually, you have a short life expectancy in your organisation. You're either not going to go up, or you're going to go out, or you're going to get shunted over to one side there. So organisations, they have a complex relationship. They need the mavericks. They need these contrarian viewpoints, but not all the time, just sometimes. And the problem with mavericks is they don't know when to shut up. You know? And we all have that delusion there. I could be a maverick if I wanted to be. Yeah, go ahead. Right. So this is the situation here. And I'll give examples of perhaps uses of a red team. So for example, many of you may recognise this place. It's the Canary Wharf development there in the City of London there. And so it was the development during the late 80s and 90s. And you can see a huge number of office blocks built there. Now, what happened was the Canary Wharf developers made some assumptions when they built this there. So they knew at the time that actually City of London office space was a rental was about £80 per square foot per year. It was really expensive because there isn't much of a city there. It's very small. And they realised they could build some really fantastic office space, far, far better than in the city there, modern offices. And they could do it, and they could rent it out for £30 a square foot and still make a whopping great profit. But what they forgot to realise was, well, what are the property developers and owners and landlords in the city going to do? And of course, the way rentals go in London is you rent an office for maybe 20 years and you're stuck in that rental. So basically, if you're in year 5 of your lease, bad luck if Canary Wharf starts, you are still paying £80 a square foot the next 15 years. So the London property developers are still well funded. But if your lease comes up for rent, you're not going to be offered it at £80. You're offered it about £50, £40 a square foot. Now, are you going to move 5 miles away? There's no tube train there at the time for £10 a square foot. They didn't. So it actually went into bankruptcy receivership there, and a lot of it was actually bought by the City of London property developers anyway. Another use would be proposed in an IT project there. So perhaps in that IT project, you'd be able to uncover the issues that are perhaps hidden there. So what issues haven't we found out yet? How can we uncover them? What assumptions have we made? And when are those assumptions really important? And when are they not really going to matter? And the red team allows you to safely, and that's a really important word, because safe, often we're not feeling safe at raising these issues. It allows you to safely raise the issues, challenge those assumptions and move forwards. So what are the critical factors for this red team? Well, essentially, if you look here, there's a couple of books here, quite useful books there, and they will give you, they'll give it in a bit more detail there. So that's a couple of bits of resources. But essentially what you do need is, you need your boss buy-in. Because your boss buy-in, they're going to be setting the expectations, they're going to be setting the permissions, they're going to give you the resources, and hopefully they also need to listen to you and accept the findings there. You also need a clear and appropriate brief, and you need an effective team and tools there. We'll talk a bit about the team and tools now. And this is the interesting bit for the testers here. If we look at the capabilities, so we need that, I can see the slides haven't come up quite as I was expecting, but essentially we need someone with those qualities there, maverick, creative, curious, and so on there. But also they need to be analytical, and they need empathy and facilitation skills. They need to be tactful as well to avoid conflict. Now there's two things you can see in that. The first is, if you look at that list, doesn't that describe a tester? You know, creative, curious, maverick, you know, not taking what you're shown as accepted. This is a really good place for testers. They need people with our skills. The second thing as well is that if you look at these, say self-confident but humble. Yeah. And Have you ever heard of a tactful maverick? Very often, these qualities are not going to reside in a single person. But that's okay. That's why we have diverse teams. So make your teams diverse, like this team here. So many of you will recognize these people. Probably this person on the right more. That's Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize winner. Okay? This is his research partner. They worked together for many years, and that's Amos Tversky. Two very different people. If you got at a psychology conference and you got up on the stage like this, and you said something they didn't agree with there, Amos Tversky, he was going to prove you wrong. And if you were really unlucky at any questions, he was going to stand up and he was going to humiliate you in front of 100 people. Daniel Kahneman, very different. If you stood on the stage and said something he did not agree with, he would think, under what conditions could this be true? And he would explore that. Two very different things, very useful, and you need both of those in these red teams there. So here's the qualities. So we asked that question, why can't we mark our own homework? And why do we have these pathologies? And it's because we suffer from a series of cognitive biases. And actually, this is my input into the initiative that we've got at our organisation there. Is I look at these biases and try and understand how they are affecting or causing problems. Or sometimes, usually actually, it's the other way around. I look at the problems and try and work out, well, what biases might be driving this? So, for example, qualities you might need there in looking at those biases. Well, bias blind spot, where that's basically where we can see biases in others, can't see it in ourselves there. Or confirmation bias, which affects a lot of the planning there, where we just take information and we look at it and believe it supports our existing point of view there, and we look for confirmation. Or the overconfidence effect, which causes us to sort of do crazy things. And of course, everybody's favourite there, groupthink. Okay, and this is currently where I'm doing a bit of work around here, looking to put together some debiasing activities and workshops, as well as introspection and self-awareness. The other thing we need are some structured thinking tools. So it's not just challenging it there, but actually with some tools. So it's just like golf. You're playing a course there, you will have different tools for different shots. And we have that in software development as well. Different tools for different testing things. And so if you looked at what we do in this actual activity, you're going to start off there on an engagement. You're going to have some diagnosis, work out what the problem is, a bit of a creative phase, and then a challenge back. And you're perhaps going to have that as an iterative process and go around a couple of times. So you need different thinking tools for there. So essentially, in that diagnosis phase, these are kind of the activities you're going to be doing there. Okay? Challenging those assumptions. And then you've got a whole series of tools that will be able to do that for you. Okay. And then if you get to the creative phase, you've got a different set of activities. And again, you've got some tools that actually will help you specifically around here. Some of these tools have actually been taken from, what's it called? I forget the word now. It's structured thinking and liberating structures is the word I was looking for there. And similarly, if you're in the challenge phase there, you've got different activities you're doing and different tools that are going through there. This is a very useful book for those tools, actually. It's a very expensive book. It's probably about 70 euros or something like that. It's structured analytical techniques. It was written by two people at the CIA. It's used for intelligence analysis there. Very, very useful, the tools that are in it there. And another book there, quite useful, which is around, you can do some case studies. So, the other thing we get hit with is groupthink. So we've got some books on groupthink, and we've got some more tools for them there. So, in summary, basically, we have big problems with our organisations when they start out on these problems. We can't, and the reasons is because of problems that we know. We can't mark our own homework. In order to do this, we need to get buy-in from our boss, And actually, it's a really interesting place because we've got all of the tools and the mindsets for doing this work. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions?
Thank you too, indeed. Yes, they have some questions for you. Wouldn't it be better to train the people within the cooperations to be able to provide a transparent and safe workspace instead of having a separate red team?
Yep, that's actually a good question, and that's an interesting point. And actually, that is another. This is only part of an overarching framework that I'm getting into. So one of them is to get. Yeah, so there's several approaches. One is to train up the team itself. The next is this, where it's saying, yeah, we can't do that. So we know we're going to make some mistakes, so we'll set up a separate team. The other is that perhaps we'll look at doing some debiasing and some inner boosts of people there and training them in these techniques. And a fourth one actually is very much like the agile. It's just saying, we know we can't look this far in the future, so we're not going to bother. We're just going to make a short-term plan. We're going to get to there, and then we're going to do another plan there. And each of them are suitable under different circumstances. But yeah, good point.
Okay. Being a consultant, I can often afford to put myself in the court jester role. Does the red team need to be a team, which means does it need to be more than one person?
I've never heard of it being a single person, but I could see that an individual could have most of the skills for doing this. And you probably got the 80-20 rule applying here. An individual could probably deliver a large amount of these benefits there. So it is possible, yeah.
Okay, do you have some example of a red team having success in IT project management?
It's still early days for that. What we're doing in our organisation, actually, so before we go out to the market, is we're actually using this internally. And so when our own management is making some decisions there, we're actually spinning up a red team and actually looking at that and then challenging it back. We were using, or we were about to use it on our bid process, the RFP process there, because of course you're always doing those RFPs. But we seem to have a constant we seem to have a revolving door on the RFP manager, I think, at the moment. So the previous RFP manager was all for this, and then they've left, and the next one is not so interested in it. But yeah, it's starting, but we're starting internally.
Okay, red teams should be free of existing assumptions and should set their own mind, right? Blank page, question mark?
That would be the ideal. I kind of suspect that they won't be free of their own assumptions, but hopefully they will, and they won't be free of their own biases, but hopefully they will come with a completely different set of assumptions and biases. And so they won't overlap, and you won't have this clash there. Yeah.
Okay, have you seen patterns of issues captured by red teams on IT projects that can be used to improve proposals and governance?
So the area where I'm focusing at the moment is at the beginning there, in the actual business case and the vision bit there. Because we largely feel that firstly, that's where probably it's going wrong most, and secondly, that's where the biggest gains are. But we can certainly see in other parts there where, say, for example, if you get into development, for example, maybe if they're in have a red team, they could actually be asking challenge questions around actually about this, whether the development is appropriate or not. That's going to require some kind of permissions around it's okay to ask those questions, which probably we need to set the ground at the start of that for that.
Okay, we have a few questions regarding the Maverick, but I only have time for one more, and that is, if, for example, a red team is split between a Maverick and a tactful person, how do you prevent the Maverick from getting a bad rap as a difficult colleague?
I guess it's several approaches you could do that. One is that actually you get the tactful person to be the interface. There are some disadvantages of that, not least of which is that the tactful person someone may have their own agenda and may not always push forwards the forthright views of the maverick there. The second thing is something that you shouldn't do, which is actually consider your mavericks expendable and sort of, let them be unpopular and then move them elsewhere. And I suspect that's a cynical thing that we probably will end up doing.
Ladies and gentlemen, Andrew Brown, thank you so very much.
Thank you.